Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Today we're talking all about data in innovation in assessment. My name is Gavin O'Mara and I'm joined by Dean Blewett from NCFE. This is a joint NCFE and FE News live stream. Dean, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Good, yeah.
We
How are you?
got yeah, really good. I'm really interested in today. We're talking about data around innovation in assessment. We're looking at what that could mean for assessment, but also how we can help with ongoing development in the sector. Really interesting timing. We've got a week of VocTech this week, so I don't know if you could explain what week of VocTech is, Dean, and how people maybe get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Week of Octech, we run this session obviously as part of that. But yeah, it's run by UFI Octech Trust. It's a week that UFI do every single year. The idea is to bring lots of different stakeholders together, so educators, policymakers, innovators, and really share, I guess, how technology is transforming vocational and technical education and skills. So there's lots of sessions on throughout the week. Some are online, some are face to face. You can have a little look at all those different sessions at weekofoctech.co.uk. I think a big highlight for me this week, I'm going to be in London on Thursday. Again, after going down to Wembley at the weekend, I had to slip that in, Gavin. Yeah, so it's a UFI showcase event, and I know Flash Academy, so Simon, one of our guests here, will be there as well. And that's really the highlight of the week, bringing together all these different organizations and showing how technology is making that difference. And that's free to attend as well. So if you're around Liverpool Street Station, get yourself signed up.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you, Dean. And today we've got three guests. We're doing a little bit of a different format. We've even got Victoria, who's joined us from India in a tree house, which is like kind of cool. We've also got Barnaby Grimble from Pupil Progress, and we've got Simon Wheatley from Flash Academy. But can we talk about innovation and assessment and the fund? Because it's coming up to a close pretty soon. What would you say if, say, someone was feeling, I'd really love to get involved with this. I've got a really cracking idea, but I don't know if this is going to be right for the fund. What would you sort of recommend, Dean?
Yeah, no. So yeah, I mean, every window that we do, we're up to Windows 7 now. They've all got a different theme. The theme for this window is really on those impact projects. So we're looking for projects to go and deliver and test that real meaningful change with around about 1,000 learners. So I mean, if your idea is still very early stage, it's probably not the right funding window for you because we are looking for those bigger ones. But a great way to sort of test this, we've got lots of support materials available. So got an eligibility checker. That's a really quick acid test just to see actually do I meet high level the needs of the fund. We try and be really, really transparent about our fund as well. So we've got loads of guidance documents on there. I think we've got 10-page documents right about what we're looking for, how you'll be scored, what to expect at each stage that you can get access to as well. And in fairness, we've done this 7 times. We've had loads of feedback from the first window where, we asked for lots of information initially. We've now got a 3-stage process. And our first stage is what we call an expression of interest. And, we try and keep that light touch for any potential applicants. So they're not investing, 10, 20 hours in an application. The idea of this first stage is really to, find out, have we got that alignment there? Is it something we'd like to hear a little bit more of? And is it something that we could do together? But you can find all that as well as, previous project case studies on our website. And I'm sure that'll be in the banner as I'm talking. Actually, it's there at the bottom. So great timing.
Yeah. So yeah, there's the URL. Yeah, we're also going to, we're live. We're live right now. It's 10:04. So if anyone wants to join and ask any questions, we got, a bunch of people that are really able to answer those for you today, and also what it's been like on the other side of being on the fund. And I think we're probably going to move over to the guests in a moment as well, Dean. I've just seen as I said, we had Victoria joining us from a treehouse in India, but I've noticed that she's been a bit flicking in and out. So let's maybe need to give a little bit of a window there to be able to do that. So I wonder if I could bring the guests in. So we've got Simon Wheatley from Flash Academy. Hey Simon, how are you?
Yeah, very good. Good to
we
be
got
here.
Barnaby. I'm going to bring you in. And hey Barnaby and Victoria, how are you?
Hey, sorry about that.
Oh no, nothing at all. Like, I'm very jealous you've been in a treehouse in India. So I think no worries there at all. Victoria, can I kick things off with yourself? Why should we be interested in assessment data, and what impact can it have on learner success?
It's a great question. And you can imagine it's one that I spend an awful lot of time thinking about, because data is not trendy, is it? It's really not trendy. Things have happened in education that have meant that people want to talk all about the curriculum. They want to talk all about pedagogy. And then when it comes to data, they're like, oh, I don't want to talk about data.
Really sad. I love a bit of data. I'm like,
inside, I'm like, no. So how do I tackle that question when I'm presented with people that don't want to talk about data? And I guess the thing is, sometimes we talk about assessment data as an endpoint about tracking. It's about monitoring the extent to which a pupil has learned something. And I like to remind people that data has more than one function, assessment data especially, in that it can help us to understand the extent to which the intended curriculum has been delivered as we intended it. Data presents us with that function, if used well. It can also help us to understand the extent to which the curriculum that we've intended is the right curriculum, because how do we know unless we assess the pupils and understand whether or not it's landing? And we can also help us to understand if it's working for all pupils. So all pupils coming from different contexts, backgrounds, needs, barriers, those sorts of things. So your question was, why is it important? Well, if we think beyond just tracking progress of a child and think about all its other evaluative capabilities, I think it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, definitely. I think also there's options in there as well around how can we help with pedagogy with educators as well, isn't it? And how we sort of finding gaps within there and stuff. Dean, I don't know if you want to sort of jump in at all.
No, it's a really, I think obviously working at NCFE, the awarding body, there's certain ways we use data here. But yeah, working previously as a maths teacher, I love data, and it can be used in sort of all those different ways. And I find it really exciting personally. But yeah, I know Barnaby obviously used to be a practitioner as well. People Progress obviously work with a lot of different sort of providers, I guess, in terms of making the most out of their data as well. So you'll really understand as well that true impact it can have. But I guess just on a more sort of practical level, what are sort of the biggest challenges that people face when they're trying to use data?
I mean, it's really interesting, with what Victoria said there, that the need for data it's across so many stakeholders. It's the learner, the teacher, the leader of the school. And I think the biggest challenge that you kind of see in a lot of schools at the moment is that data is really, it's guarded. It's in places that are really unreachable. It's very, it's not very transparent to everybody. So, for example, I know Victoria Simon would have experienced this themselves in their own teaching, where when you're looking at what the grades the students are working at, you're probably using your own spreadsheets. You've had to create those. You might have an art department or drama department, or it might be a particular department that doesn't have the Excel skills to do that. But then even if you do, you've got a fantastic spreadsheet, well, then you've got to get that data out. You've got to put it into a central system. Do that 3 points in the year. Then senior leaders can look at it. By the time they've actually analysed it, well, we're 3 weeks, 4 weeks behind. And I've already moved on. I've already told the kids that's where they're at. And I think it's that lack of transparency, that lack of, efficiency that is a biggest challenge, because it means we're not then in the right place to support. And it's something that, we're really aware of at People Progress. So that's what led us to actually start it, was making sure that people had really good example specific tracking that made them able to then assess and put their marks in a way that matches them and their curriculum, but gave the transparency to teachers, to leaders, to see where the gaps were, which students were underperforming, which parts of the curriculum, as Victoria said, which parts of the curriculum have been well delivered, that we actually are improving, and which bits need support. When you've got that transparency and everyone can see from that same source of data at any point in the curriculum that fits them and fits the right time for them to assess in the right places, then you can really have transformative data that actually affects the students. And that's the ultimate goal. We're trying to actually make sure the students have got it in their hands, that same data, so that they know and they're really engaged as well.
Yeah, no, very cool. Simon, can I bring you in? You've been there patiently waiting and listening on me. How can we make data more accessible and actionable? Maybe thinking with technology in mind.
Yeah, because I think I'm the odd one out here because I've never been a teacher. I'm a technology guy through and through. So I've come from data. As everybody here says, data. I love data. I think, and everything we try and do here at Flash Academy is sort of data driven. Although we can always be better. I think, as Victoria said, data is sometimes can be a bad thing, but I think that's because there's a big difference between data and information. And I think what Barnaby's trying to do is provide usable information from data. And the problem with data is it can be sometimes like a huge swimming pool of points of information that, and I think the other thing that Barnaby said, which is really critical, is it's not useful if it's not real time, because children, students, adults, education moves at a pace. So if it's not delivered in real time, then it's not going to be very valuable. So I think technology's role is to do the heavy lifting. I think that's our key point. We do the heavy lifting. If we can do the heavy lifting, we release educators to do the things that they can uniquely do. Technology won't be able to determine whether the child's just lost their pet or is having struggling at home or hasn't ate properly or whatever. We can't do those kind of things. But what we can do is take the heavy lifting and the data processing problems away from the educators, and again, like Barnaby at Flash Academy, what we've tried to do is to automate the assessment process, make it digital, and right now we're marking it too, so we're kind of doing all that kind of repetitive, time-consuming stuff as rapidly as possible, and we're allowing the educators to mark the marking. Okay, that's the way we see things. Let the because you got to, the educators have got to still remain in control. They've still got to have that oversight because technology is not perfect. But what we can do is we can take a burden of time away from them. So what we're trying to do is give them, somewhere between 35 and 45 minutes back per assessment. And if we can do that, they can do lots more useful things in real time with their students, and we can focus on helping them with that. But in order to do that, you really need to do a couple of things consistently. And I think Barnaby touched on that. One is the data's got to be consistent. It's got to be without bias of any sort. And I think sometimes that's something that's really tricky for technology to do. It's got to be granular enough to be useful. Can't say that word very well, but it's got to be enough detail to be useful, but at the same time, not drown people in data. And I think it's got to be traceable. As Barnaby said, it's got to be accessible. You've got to be able to export that data out into useful information rather than just lots and lots of data. And I think that's the key to it. I mean, I think we should probably, all of us here could go on all day about it. But the reality is, it's how do you give teachers time back by doing the heavy lifting for them and providing the information in a way that makes it very accessible in real time. I think they're the key points from our side.
It's really a really good point. I mean, I remember when I was teaching as well, and you made a really good point about sort of teachers still, doing that sort of transition between the using the data and how the learners then use it. And they play such a key role in that. I mean, I've tried all sorts of things, in my own experience. I've tried sticky notes, I've tried, technology, I've tried reports, and it's just so key to get that sort of step right. And I wonder if we can bring sort of Victoria back in a little bit in terms of, you've worked quite a bit with providers and practitioners themselves. What are sort of those really practical advice that you can give to those providers and practitioners in terms of using that data to make sure it is driving those real improvements?
Yeah, the first thing I'd say there is reframe it and make sure that people understand that data doesn't make statements. Right? Data doesn't have the answers to the problem. All it can ever do is signpost us to asking another great question, and be really that's an easy thing to be very, very deliberate about, and insist that when you present data, for example, I've been that subject leader, middle leader, teacher presenting information back to my pupils. You say to us, what questions does this lead us to ask about ourselves, our work, our impact? And you can be quite deliberate. That's an easy action step now. Just change how you present it. It's not a statement, it's a question. That would be my first top tip. Another thing's probably a bigger piece of work, but it's worth thinking about, is make sure that you demystify the data. Data is numbers, essentially. Numbers mean something, but they only mean something when they're presented against another number. When there's something to compare it against, to benchmark, to reference. A number on its own means nothing. 8 out of 10 means nothing. 8 means nothing. 8 out of 10 means very little. But is 8 out of 10 any good when the rest of the class got 9 out of 10? That's interesting. So it's always make sure you're positioning the data next to another piece of data that helps us make sense of the data that we've got. That's a simple one. And then I like to think about the culture around the data. If I drop this data here, are the people receiving it able, knowledgeable, comfortable enough to be able to receive it in the manner that it's meant? Or do I need to do a little bit more work to make sure that this data is going to be received, understood, and investigated in the right way? So a perfect example of this is a piece of work I've been doing with a provider actually recently, where we're collecting stakeholder voices, essentially what's happening. And when we present that back to the school whose stakeholder voice that belongs to, interestingly, our learning point was, oh, well, hold on. They're wanting to prove a point, whereas we're presenting it as, oh, it identifies gaps. So you have to be really, really sure, why are we even presenting the data in the first place? Was it to prove a point that you already had that you wanted to prove, or was it to identify gaps for improvement? So a perfect thing there is doing some groundwork on what's the purpose of the data that we're sharing in the first instance, so that we can then prepare everyone to be ready to receive it and query it and challenge it. It's a culture question, I think.
Yeah, I think just picking up on that point you make there, Victoria, I think the frame of reference for the data is really critical, because you can be in your box, in your frame of reference, whether it's your school, whether it's your year, whether it's your class, and unless the data is presented to you in a way that you can then understand your frame of reference, then it becomes, as you point out, becomes of little value, because really what people are wanting data to do is to be able to compare themselves against either a standard or an improvement objective, and that frame of reference for the data is really critical. So I think our challenge as technology providers is to be able to segment the data and layer it down in strata so that people can look at things from, let's say, trust level down to institution level, or college level down to group level, regional level. It's how you segment that information, because I think you're absolutely right. People get fixated on a number, but the numbers mean nothing, as you say. I think it's a really super important point.
And if I can build on that as well, there's also, excellent, thank you, responsibility of providers, but I sort of sit between providers and practitioners. I'm in this weird space. I work with both. There's a responsibility of the schools, the education establishment, whomever they are, the practitioners, to be really, really clear from their perspective what the data's for, and prepare their staff, their teams to do that, without both sides taking their responsibility of having that clarity on what the data's for, how it's going to be used, and crucially, and I used to write this into our policy statements, how it's not going to be used. We will not use this information for this. You get a little bit more comfortability on terms of how am I expected to read and utilize this. So yeah, responsibility from both angles is definitely there.
Yeah,
it's
ethical.
So interesting. Well, we're like just hearing both Simon and Victoria saying, and it's that time element as well that you mentioned, Simon, that and the detail that you go into, like just having a grade doesn't give you enough, doesn't give you anything to action. Okay, you might tell you where the kids are relative to each other, but doesn't give you that extra detail. And when you've kind of got that combination of more efficiency in what you're doing with data, gives you then the time to actually engage with it. And I think that's so important. Like, there's so much focus on collecting the data from assessments, and then it's like, great, we've done it, put it in the box, right, we've put it into reports, that's it, no more. Like, and that's the most important bit. It's going back to it, as you say, Victoria, interrogating it and going, what are we actually going to do? What have we learned from this? What's the questions this is raising to interrogate?
100%, because we talk about the frame of reference of the data itself, but then there's also the frame of reference of time. Yeah, because again, it's really what people are interested in is progression. is velocity of progression, and how the velocity of progression changes between institutions, classes, and what can you learn about why is this group of students accelerating faster in their learning than this group of the students. So time plays this important role as well. So, and again, as you say, Barnaby, if you're spending 80% of your time processing the data and 20% of your time looking at the data rather than the other way around, which I think is the key, then it's the wrong way around. And people, and to Victoria's point, that's where the culture becomes a problem, because people say, oh, I'm wasting all my time processing the data. It's not doing anything for me, because of course, you know, if you can't see those frames of reference, then you're really struggling.
Yeah. And on that, I was there. I was in the teaching profession when the workload charter came in. It's a few years ago now, but it still stands. And data came out really badly, didn't it? Collection of data, analysis of data came out as a workload pressure that people still report on today. Shared contact of ours, Barnaby, Pete Davis, talks about data decay, and I love that phrase, and I'll never steal it from him. I'll always reference him. But this idea of data decay, if the minute the data goes in, it's then decaying from the second it's been captured before we're then able to use it. What happens is the perception of workload starts to increase. It's like, what's the point of this? I can't see where it's going to go. Or by the time we look at it, it's too far. So workload's an interesting conversation when it comes to data, because teachers, educators will do everything they can. Everyone I've ever met will do everything they can if they value it and they see purpose in it. If they're being asked to do something that they don't value and they don't see purposes, the resulting outcome is perception of impact on workload. And then we've lost the magic of teaching, helping pupils progress, helping students make great choices. And we've started getting into the nitty-gritty of the bureaucracy of it. So we've all got to think really carefully about how to reduce, to coin Peter's phrase, data decay.
We got a really interesting point come through from someone on LinkedIn who gone anonymous or mysterious, but I think an interesting point that I wanted to sort of mention as well is unintended consequences with data as well, particularly if we're thinking of AI and large machine learning and what that future could be as well. I think we need to be very conscious of what we do with data for the longer term. We're looking at trends as well, isn't it? It's very, very interesting. Barnaby, can I bring you in around edtech companies? How can they better collaborate with educators to create assessment tools that truly meet needs? And maybe Simon, you could jump on this as well. But what practical ways that people can collaborate more with educators to better really think around what data could mean to better make impactful, positive change?
I mean, the most important thing, I think, is that any technology that we bring in has to have come from the classroom. It's got to actually serve a core need for teachers, for students, for parents. It's got to address something for them. The whole goal of it is we're trying to raise attainment or engagement of students to really sort of improve their opportunities. And, you know, it was something for our own journey with People Progress, where it was like, you know, I was trying to look at data across the curriculum, and I couldn't see anything. I'd have to go to teachers, I'd have to wait. It would be, you'd have that data decay that Victoria's talking about before I could actually do anything. And really, when you've got the tools to help you to then be more efficient, then you can actually really drive the change. And of course, with those tools, the challenge is for edtech companies is, great, this works for me in my context, but it's now, how's it going to work in every context? We're going to make this a national solution. If this is going to work in every school, I want this to work in schools with high deprivation. I want this to work in alternative provision units. I need it to work in any context. Then we've really got to make sure that we're listening to our users, getting the right feedback to then build on that. And it was, you know, for me, it was really important. So we did the Assessment Innovation Fund round 5, I think it was, that we were successful with, and we had a great experience. You know, I worked with Dean on that as well, and the team, and it was great because for us as a company, it gave us a real focus point to go, we want to research what the actual impact is of our platform on teachers, students, and we want to hear their voice. We want to understand. As part of that research project, we looked at how English and maths, the grades change between 2 points. And then actually it was really investigating. So what questions is this throwing up? not only did we see that underperforming students were closing gaps significantly in the space of 3 months, but the reason behind that was, that you actually had that same piece of data which senior leaders could look at, could engage with, and they had the tools to identify the right kids, target them for interventions. The kids had the same reports so that they could then engage with that data too. So they knew, oh, right, you put this intervention session on for me because I actually really need to develop this skill on geometry in looking at circle theorem. That's the session that I need because that's my gap. You build that motivation in. And then that means that you don't have to then pay for chicken and chips to get the kids in, because that's the only other thing if they're not motivated. So with that research project, it was important for us to then not have that as isolated. It's like, right, great. As an EdTech company, our thing is not just the platform. How are we now getting that out in workshops? How are we making sure that all other users of the platform can also benefit from the best ways of using it effectively? That then raises your attainment in the classroom and ultimately affects the learner at the end of the day, because that's our ultimate goal.
You're touching all the hot buttons there for Dean, talking about maths. Do you know what I mean? It's like
I hear there's one coming up soon as well that might be worth going for.
Absolutely.
I think the challenge for EdTech is this kind of, it's almost impossible to design a product that meets everybody's need in any sphere, and EdTech's no different. And I think the challenge is, how do you become big enough to get enough feedback from your users? I mean, we would say at Flash Academy that our product's designed by teachers, because we've got so many teachers now who are able to feed information back, because each slightly different requirement needs to be aggregated at a level which means it can be useful to everybody. So there's this challenge of how does a company who's got a specific solution get to the point where they can be large enough to get enough information that's useful to then make it. So it's like we see it like it's pushing a ball up a hill. You get to a certain point where you're pushing the ball up the hill, you take information, but then all of a sudden you get large enough that the information starts to flood back at you. And I think that's where, as you say, you've got to listen. You've got to be constantly listening, but you need to be listening to a wide range of voices, not just one or two over here in this corner. As you point out, each use case can be slightly different, and that is a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. Dean, we're nearly wrapped up. Nearly
yeah.
The time's flown by, isn't it?
It actually has. Yeah, I was really enjoying that. I could listen all day. We usually end on sort of one question. This is for everyone, really. So the final question is, if you could change just one thing, so whether that's a policy, practice, or technology in education related to data, what would it be and why? Should we start with Simon? Is that okay? Yeah, for me, it's just how we use a primary data key. I mean, I hear, we have this thing about, we have the UPN for students, but how can that be used more effectively by all EdTech providers, so that there's one key that we can all come back to, one reference point we can come back to for data, and then from that enables a whole load of other problems. For Barnaby in particular, I can imagine if we could use that well, it would really
solving that one. It's good.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Should we go to Barnaby next? Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really funny. Like, I mean, I've worked with thousands of teachers now, and kind of one of the things that's really clear to me is data's emotional. Like, you can kind of just go, it's no numbers on a page. It's not. It's when you see exactly where your students are at, it leaves you vulnerable. It can put you in a place of fear, because do you know what? If the kids aren't at the level that you think they should be, that can ask questions, and difficult questions. And it also puts the kids in a position of vulnerability. They don't, where they're kind of like not achieving where they want, demotivating, it can really bring them down. So it's one of those things that I think is really important to recognize as teachers and leaders in the classroom, is that whenever we're looking at data, the focus has to be, like Victoria said, what we're not going to use this for. This is not going to be used to beat you down. This is not going to be, right, you're not doing it right. What's going on? You get on with it. You need to change it. You need to fix it. The conversation, and what we really always need to work towards, is how we flip that into support. It's got to be, I'm so pleased. We've got to celebrate that rawness of data. I'm so pleased I can actually see where we're actually at, because when I know where we're at, I can actually do something about it. I can support you. I can get the right resources in place. We can work as a team. And that goes right from the leadership down, to the teacher in the classroom, to the student himself and their parents. Like that trio Like, great, we know where we're at. There's no fear. That's where we're at. It's a realistic picture. What we're going to do about it. We know you've got the potential. Let's get you there. So I think that for me is the real thing. Get away from that fear of data and make sure we put the right support in place for teaching our students to raise their opportunities.
Yeah, I totally agree. Victoria, we're totally out of time, but I'm really keen to find out from you, like what you'd like to see and change.
Oh, I'm going to be really quick, but my mantra at the moment is equity for all subjects at all times when it comes to the data decision. So we have real strong, standardized, robust assessment in certain subjects that we experience. And in other subjects, the investment, the time, the energy, the methodology hasn't yet been developed to make sure that practical, performance, technical subjects are represented in quite the same way. So when we're looking at a pupil, a school, an organization, we don't just look at a fraction of the data that's available, but we have good data for all of it. I'd change that.
No, sounds cool. Dean, we're out of time anyway, but I'm going to ask you, what would you want to see?
Oh, wow. I mean, there's so many things we've touched on today. I think it is that culture point for me, and it's as much about the teachers and how they're using it. We've touched on the edtech organisations and how they connect their data to users, but also the learners as well. And it's that accessibility, transparency for them, and ultimately giving them and equipping them with the skills to be able to use that data. They're going to be exposed way more than I was when I was a learner to data, and I think it's how they use that and how they have that critical eye. So yeah.
No, sounds cool. Thank you everyone for today. It was really, really, really cool episode. Thank you for all your insights. Next week's the last of the series. I can't believe it. We're going to be looking at personalisation, which I think data is absolutely key for that. But I just want to say thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to everyone for all your insights. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Thanks everyone.
Bye, everyone.